basically all the hiring from interns all the way to director level and everything in between, of course. Help run the internship and then active in a lot of like DEI circles. So yeah.
Great, thanks. I'll pass it over to Natalie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Natalie Kim. I'm the founder of We Are Next, which is a resource for students and junior talent who are just starting their careers in advertising and marketing specifically. And We Are Next has been around for about 5 years. And before that, I worked agency side for about 10 years. I was director of strategy at Firstborn, and before that at Johannes Leonardo in New York. And started my career in LA, where I went to school. Anyways, I am super passionate about supporting young talent and helping them through the hurdles that we all face. So I'm really excited to be here on this panel today.
Great, thanks, Natalie. And next up, we have Vignesh.
Hello there. Hi, I am currently an associate creative director at Wieden Kennedy Portland. And before that, I was another ACD at FIG New York. And before that, I was at Droga 5, where I started as an intern and then I got promoted again and again till I left and joined FIG and then Portland. I am from India, Chennai, and before advertising, I studied engineering, and I decided not to do that, and then kind of switched careers and went through the whole struggle of finding visas and all that. So that's kind of the whole spiel of who I am. So if you have any questions about that, happy to answer. Super excited to be on the panel.
Great, thank you. And our last panelist we have today is Eric.
Hey guys, thanks for coming. I'm Eric Hu. I'm a strategy director here at AKQA. I work across our DC and New York City studios, and I'm part of our global healthcare center of excellence. So nerding out over all things medicine these days, which seems to be pretty timely. Before I was in advertising, I was actually a consultant, a commercial photographer, and also an undecided performing violinist. So very nonlinear career path, and that's why I'm really passionate to be on panels like these, because I help equally confused people figure out how to navigate a very, very confusing landscape. So thanks for having me.
Great, thank you so much for the introductions. And for anyone who just joined, we will have Q&A at the end, but if you do have questions throughout, feel free to put it in the chat and we'll pay attention to that later on when we have the Q&A. So to kick it off, I wanted to ask Natalie with We Are Next. It's such an amazing resource, and I've even done the coffee at a distance to mentor the young students and professionals in the industry. And I'd love for you to share like more about the current events and initiatives for everyone to know what's happening with We Are Next.
Yes, of course. So it's funny because during summer, We Are Next slows down a little bit. So what we put out these days is a little bit different than we do the rest of the year. But I can tell you the things that the resources that are up and running regularly these days. So you mentioned Coffee at a Distance, which is our mentorship program. We used to do it quarterly. We've been doing it. We'll probably not do it until fall. Again, summer is kind of a quiet time for us with a lot of students, already in internships. And so Coffee at a Distance is our version of a mentorship program. We basically have people like you and Bernice from the industry, and Eric, I know, has been a mentor as well. We invite them to be kind of put in this database, in this pool of mentors, and then young talent registers for access and essentially can reach out to anyone they want based on the profiles of the mentors. And we found that this kind of a little bit more looser format for mentorship and connection has been really effective versus kind of the one-on-one matching that you typically see with mentorship programs. So you can look out for that in the fall. No application or anything needed. It's totally open to everyone. You just have to register. We have a weekly job board that refreshes every week on Sundays. We list 24 jobs at a time, and we're only looking at internships and entry-level roles and junior roles. So you know, we really want to find like really high quality opportunities for the community. And so that's a very well-loved resource. And lastly, we do a weekly Q&A on Instagram through our stories. We just wrapped it up yesterday. And that's always fun, just to kind of give quick answers to people's like sometimes very specific situations that they find themselves in. A lot of questions on internships these days as people are in the thick of it. But all of our other resources, like our weekly email and our podcast, which is very popular, there's a bunch of like back episodes and archived things on our website. So it's a really rich place to kind of just go dig through if you have a specific question about a specific topic.
Great, thanks for sharing that. So I did put in the link in the chat for people to take a look at. Definitely study it, bookmark it. There's so many great resources from where we are next. And the next question, I wanted to pass it over to Josh in recruitment. For those who are looking for jobs, it would be great to hear from you, like what stands out when you look at resumes, or like what are some instant rejections for people to be aware of?
Yeah, I want to preface first by saying that resume review is highly subjective, and it does vary from agency to agency and from just recruiters amongst recruiters like myself and my talent director have differences. I would say the most universal things, of course, are pretty standard, as you know, just make sure spelling and grammar is all correct. This might sound super obvious, but if you're using a template for your cover letter, and I actually do recommend personally to send a cover letter in for entry-level roles, just because there's a ton of resumes that don't have one. And if you have a cover letter, it kind of sets you apart a little bit. But there's a caveat that a lot of people use templates, and I have often received, and this is across multiple companies, that people send the wrong company name to me. So they'll apply to like David&Goliath, but then it'll be a name of a different agency on there. So make sure to definitely double check your work for that. And I did want to add that these days, there's so many different avenues that, you know, resumes are still important for us just because it's still, you know, such a long-standing tradition. But we've been looking at other ways to recruit. You know, we've actually recruited someone through Clubhouse, which I don't know if you all are aware, but basically a social app where, you know, our leadership was speaking on a panel, someone asked a question, and it kind of led to more conversations, and eventually they got recruited and brought on as, you know, an ACD, an associate creative director for us. So, you know, pretty cool stories with that. I know just this week, TikTok has released TikTok resumes. So while we haven't adopted that just yet, you know, with the way that social and digital are growing, there's a lot of different ways to pursue finding a job. But yeah, I would say the biggest thing is just to do a little bit of research about the company you're applying to. I know as an entry-level person, or even just someone still in college looking for internships, you're probably shotgun blasting a ton of applications. But you know, this place is potentially somewhere you're going to work for several months for an internship, and or years if you're looking for a full-time role. So just do your due diligence, curate a little bit. You know, it doesn't have to be the full cover letter or even the full resume, but just mention something about the company that you saw on their website, a recent bit of work that you've done, because that truly will separate you. I know a lot of people also wonder about cold applications through email and stuff. We do look through our online applications. I would just say that there's probably like 100 applicants for every one entry-level position there is. So the best way to go about that is actually to just network. Find someone that is already working at that company in a position that maybe you want. Reach out innocuously in a way that's not the same as, hey, I want a job here, can you help me out? But more like, hey, I'd love to learn a little bit more about what you do. Can you share some background? I've had so many more referrals from people internally that have already like pre-vetted a candidate for me. And then they're like, oh, this person's from my alma mater. And they were really kind, so we just wanted to see if we have open positions. They'll do the job for you if you are good at the whole networking thing, which I realize also maybe speaking too broadly, but as a first-gen Asian, I was like, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to impose myself on other people, but that really is what this industry is about. All industries are about. So that's my recommendation, that first off, spelling errors, no, please. Secondly, please go ahead and use your alumni networks. Heck, this is a great set of people already that you have. And finally, you know, be on the lookout for new ways to apply, because it's not all just going to be online applications through the website anymore. Yeah.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. And I definitely recommend people to find new ways to look for jobs, because I've even had a colleague that found their job at our agency through Fishbowl. So there's so many new ways. So definitely try to be creative to make yourself stand out from the competition. So the next question I have is for Eric, because throughout your career, you've had so many different roles, that from creative, account, from product management, strategist, and teacher. So what advice would you give for people still trying to figure out like which vertical they want to work in? And it'd be great for people to hear from you.
Totally, yeah. First of all, Josh, I love the answer that you gave, and that was like a very strategy kind of thing to do. You like told people what you were gonna say, then you said it, and then you were like, "But here's what I just told you." Loved it. That could have been a deck by itself. But yeah, no, Jessalin, I agree. I appreciate the question. I mean, I think for most of my career, I just didn't know what I wanted to do, right? And I think it stems from me being really lost in middle and high school. Like I was a C's and D's kind of student, never understood how a classroom could be where I could learn anything. So the only way I could get into college was through my violin. And thank goodness I was decent at it. So then I could actually get into an esteemed institution. And from there, it was, I would say early 2010s, New York City was, the startup scene was first bursting, and really what startups are great at doing are hiring young people who are willing to kind of put those 10, 12, 14-hour days in and just try to absorb all that information, right? And I think what I take from that is I'm really good at setting boundaries now with my work-life balance. But what I'm even better at doing is really fueling that kind of curiosity and willingness to just say, I don't know the answer. I don't know what to do here, but let me at least try. And so that kind of experimentation and that kind of curiosity led me down a lot of different paths. But I would actually say from all the different roles that I've had, whether it's as a photographer, I was briefly an Instagram influencer for a few brands. I was a brand strategist, I was social strategist, I was new business strategist, consultant, all these different kind of hats really just land back onto one critical thing. And I would even say it's the same as violin performance, which is storytelling. And I think for our industry, a lot of what we always say is, oh, we tell stories, we have big, bold ideas, but in reality, it's not even the final product that we're talking about. It's actually how do you even present yourself and how can you craft your own narrative? And I think that's something I realized very early on, no matter what hat I was wearing, if I could prove to someone across the table that I was good at learning and I was good at absorbing new information and getting from where I am today to where I want to be tomorrow, I'd be in a good spot and I'd have long-term stability. So that's something that hopefully we could touch on today, and something that I definitely want to impart on a lot of you, which is how do you craft your own stories and get out there, no matter how linear or how non-linear your path has been.
I love how you describe that like so eloquently of like fueling the curiosity and like really being good at storytelling, because that is really important for people to learn what transferable skills and what value you bring to the table. So it's definitely great that you're teaching the people here to learn that now, because I wish I knew that earlier on in my career too.
Oh.
So the next question I have is for Vignesh. You started at Widen a couple of months ago as Associate Creative Director, which is one of the industry's world top shops. So it would be great if you could share how you got the opportunity. So then for those who are interested in getting into the creative fields.
Cool. So thank you for that question. And yeah, Eric did a great job at storytelling his answer too, by the way. How I got the job. I think it's kind of a two-part answer. The first part is a friend hired me, as in the CD who is hiring for that role. I used to work with her at Droga, where when I was a junior, she was a mid-level. So we like worked closely on a 6-month-long pitch that went nowhere. So when you're in the depths of it and struggling and working together with other people, that's when you make friends and make connections, and like you don't forget them. You realize like even in the shittiest situations, like this was a great person to work with, So she remembered me and she saw me on a list of candidates that were applying, and like, oh my God, Vignesh, I know him, I love him, I worked with him. And then she's like, okay, great, we need to get him now, kind of thing. But to get on that list, no one's going to put you on that list without you asking for it. So I reached out to Widen saying, hey, I'm looking for an opening. And they were like, okay, cool, we'll put you on the list. And kind of those things kind of cross paths. It worked together, and yeah. And the thing is, like, me and my wife used to work together as partners, and we reached out to Widen, I think 3-4 years ago, and it didn't work out timing wise. They didn't have openings, and then they reached out again like a year and a half later. Our timing wasn't right, but it's always about like keeping in touch, reaching out no matter what. This like staying in touch with your recruiter and like having a good form of communication is very key, and kind of worked out at this time. that like they had a position open and I had like the right time in my life to like move. So just worked out. And
That's
yeah,
great.
that should be, that covers it, I think.
No, thank you for sharing. And so for everyone listening, remember that networking is key at all the relationships. Don't burn any bridges, and make sure you stay in touch with people, stay professional about it. You never know what opportunities will become in your future. And I know during our prep conversation, Vignesh, you were talking about working with visas. Did you want to share a little bit more from your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Thankfully for the job I'm at right now, I didn't have to get a visa because after, I think, a 7-year-long struggle, I finally got my green card. And through the hardest political period in the US. I don't know why I applied for my green card in 2016. That's a big mistake on my part. But the thing is, for O1 visas, that's the kind of criteria of visas that advertising companies usually sponsor. It's called the visa for outstanding ability. That's why it's called O. People like Justin Bieber have it for some reason, because why not? It's funny to compare yourself, but it's for people who work in fields that are not kind of quantifiable. So it's kind of like for show business and stuff like that, but kind of advertising kind of tags along. So what you need to show for these kind of criteria for visas is a lot of awards. So as a junior trying to start out, apply for a lot of awards, as many awards as you can. And even if you like want like a participation trophy, just put it on there, because the people in the government do not know the difference between a Cannes Lion or a smaller award. As long as you have something to show that you've done so many things, the amount of paperwork you submit is like 300 pages, and I'm going to look through it. It's just about swiping through. So you have like the quantity is what matters. And then the other thing is recommendations from people in the industry. So like talk to everyone. So at Droga, when I was interning, the CD helped me out a lot. He was great. He wrote a recommendation, but then he was like, go talk to everyone in the agency, just make friends. Doesn't matter if they're CDs or not. Just if you're at a happy hour, go talk to them, just get to know them. And then after that, at the end of the internship, because me and like a couple of other international people did that, we went and asked for recommendations, because a recommendation letter from like these big kind of CDs and executives help a lot as well. So those two things for a junior position, that's all you could do, because the other criteria is like you have to be a high paid salary position. So you can't show that when you're starting out, because let's face it, we're not getting that much pay for starting out. But yeah, focusing on like awards and getting that on paper, that's key. And then after that, the lawyers will take care of the rest. So you have to do your part.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm also going to pop in the chat just as an additional resource for the audience is Agent, or it's the same acronym as Asians in Advertising. It's Aliens in Advertising. It's a community for international talent and students in the US. So for anyone in the audience that can be helpful as a resource for you. And so for other questions that I wanted to ask the panelists is, well, some of the challenges, like as an Asian in this industry, what are some of the unique challenges that you faced throughout your career, and how did you overcome it?
I can start. I have two. One of them is like, I think more common and cliche, and the other one I think is not talked about as much. The first one is, and it's common among like interns and entry-level talent, people just starting out. I think it's especially like Asian Americans and Asians are like especially susceptible to this. And that is, of course, speaking up in meetings when you're starting out. It's really daunting when you're kind of the lowest on the totem pole and you're suddenly surrounded by really big voices and, you know, culturally being brought up to respect elders and to, you know, kind of like, I just feel like I was raised to really listen, and there was a lot of value in like listening. And so when I started out, that's what I did in meetings. And I got so much feedback as I was starting out from my bosses and managers saying like, we really need to hear more from you in the rooms, in meetings. And it took a while actually for me to really process and understand like how to go about that. And for me, I think the solution was one, realizing that by not speaking up, I wasn't doing my job. So just because I was a strategist didn't mean that like I could just like listen and process. Like I did need to be voicing, my thoughts. And then also understanding that like half thoughts are thoughts too. I think we get in our heads around like, I need to say something so perfect and brilliant, or else I'm not going to say anything at all. But you never really know like what you say might spark something in someone else, even if it's just like hey, is this a thing? You know what I mean? So that I think helped me also really like understand that, okay, I don't need to be so in my head about what I'm saying. Lastly, and this is something I tell a lot of young talent starting out, I started to schedule meetings with my boss or manager or someone else that I knew who's going to be in the meeting before the meeting to talk about like the topic at hand and talk about what I wanted to talk about. Because the hardest thing about speaking up is breaking in, right? Breaking into the conversation. And so that by having that kind of pre-meeting, the person was able to kind of like alley-oop moments when I could break in and make it a little bit more comfortable for me to do so. Like, hey, Natalie and I were talking earlier and, she had this idea about this. Like, Natalie, do you want to jump in here? Of course, you can't do that forever, but it's a nice like training exercise, I think, to help get you comfortable. My other specific thing is like a lot shorter. I don't drink. I did in college, but I am one of those Asians who cannot process alcohol. I just flush totally red and I go from, having a good time to like getting really, really sick, like really quickly. There's no like fun in between time. And so, in the agency world, there's a lot of drinking. There's a lot of social events, even just like happy hours on a Friday. And I think, that's something I had to overcome, that wasn't a practice of mine. And dealing with, sometimes there's a little pressure or people ask you like why you're not drinking or like, are you not having a good time? And there's no real like blanket solution. It's just kind of something that you have to have confidence in yourself over your choices. And there's so many reasons why people don't drink. It's not because like you're not fun or you're a prude or whatever. It could be health reasons. You could be a recovering alcoholic. Like there's so many reasons why. And so, you find your own other ways to have fun at those agency parties. I mean, there are other substances that are totally fine for me. You know what I mean? So like and if no substances, that's cool too. Like, so you just find like your own way to like be social and you kind of just have to, end up being comfortable with it. But it's definitely something that like no one talked to me about before I started. And then you're kind of thrown in and you're like, okay, now I have to deal with this. But yeah, those were the two that came to mind for me.
That is so relatable. Like the speaking in meetings thing is like,
Yep.
it's like hits right at home.
Totally
And
agree.
another thing that helped me in that kind of speaking in meetings thing is like the half thought you have in your head, someone else says it. It's like, wait, I was just thinking that, like, why didn't I say that? That happened to me like so many times. And now I'm like, I'm just gonna say it. I'm just gonna say, even if it sounds stupid, I'm just gonna say it. Because I don't want to have that feeling of like, I had that good thought and I let it go to waste. But I agree.
I also think in a lot of agency settings, there's this, it used to be like an expectation. Now it's almost like a requirement where everyone feels like every document or every email that goes out the door has to be spotless. And Josh, I think something you brought up earlier, I definitely agree with. Hopefully your resume, your portfolio, whatever, doesn't have typos. I don't know that I'm talking about that necessarily, but I think when we're putting together like a creative brief or responding to feedback forms or anything like that, I think, being able to articulate yourself, I think, is like number one. But I think there's also this driving motivator to always show up and be perfect and spotless and flawless. And, that's just not reasonable, right? Like we all have our own battles. We have our own personal lives going on. And I think being forgiving to ourselves, especially in this new way of working that I don't know that anyone's fully adjusted to having all of their colleagues on this like 1920 by 1080 kind of box. I think being a little kinder to ourselves when we're kind of self-editing or thinking about like, how do we bring up feedback? How do we bring up creative ideas? I think people are kinder than we'd like to believe in our own heads, our self-judging heads. So I think if we give ourselves a little bit of grace and say, sometimes it's more important to just show up and like you guys have been saying, put something into the room. It's about contributing to the energy, not contributing to this false idea of perfection.
I will also agree with all of that. I think my first review ever was like, you're too quiet, Josh. And I was like, I know, I was kind of raised that way. But to kind of go to a completely maybe random thing, you know, we're all Asian here, so we can kind of talk about it. But if you look really young, I actually like to preface with my years of experience. I actually had this issue a lot of times with my interns because they all thought that I was the same age as them or something similar to that. I actually have another friend who's an account director. She looks like she's probably 20 years old, but she has to like wear makeup to work and do all that just to make sure that people respect her. So find a unique way to get yourself known in terms of like, yeah, I'm actually this like capable. I know that years of experience doesn't always translate to seniority or wiseness or anything like that, but it does still give you that element of like, yes, I've done this for some time. That's why I always am like, yes, I've been recruiting for 7 years. I'm not fresh out of college. I might sometimes look like it depending on the day, but you know, please give me some time. You know, that's so, it's like a blessing and a curse. Obviously we enjoy looking young, but in a professional setting, it can be a little bit damaging sometimes. So it's I think a unique challenge to Asians in particular, maybe.
Thanks for sharing some of the challenges, and I'd love to move on to.
I
do you have
was
something
just
to
gonna
add?
say,
Yeah.
just one last thing. It's a heavier thing, but someone in the industry told me I was grateful that a company is paying for my visa, which is not true at all. And no one should ever hear that and made to be feel like that. You get as much, or the company gets just as much as what you get from the job. So it should never be like them doing a favor and like sponsoring you for a visa. They're getting your ideas and your skills, which is equally as important as the compensation they pay you. So you never be thought that you are less than the company. And I learned that the hard way, and hopefully no one has to go through that. And also, just adding on to that, salary-wise as well. So if you think you're getting hired and they have to sponsor a visa, it's their prerogative to work on the visa stuff. Do not worry about how much it'll cost for them to do the visa and stuff. You're doing the same skills and same amount of work that a person who doesn't require a visa is doing as well. So you're just being paid for the work. Don't worry about the visas. You're equal. And that's it for the challenges part.
Oh, that's great. Oh, thank you for sharing that. And anyone that has further questions, definitely reach out to Vignesh after this. So, and moving on to some of the challenges in terms of, or not challenges, now that we talked about challenges, moving on to the solutions, I'd love to hear from you, like if you were able to like dream big with like changes that we need for this industry, like what changes would you like to see for Asians like in this industry?
I could definitely take a stab at this. I was not raised a quiet guy. In fact, I was always in trouble since a young age for talking too much. But I think because I talk so much, one thing that I've become very cognizant of is when I look around at other big voices in a room, they are very seldom Asians or very seldom people who look or speak like me. And I think one thing that I would love to see change in the industry, honestly, and maybe I'm just biased and selfish, but I would love to see more Asian strategists, right? And I think strategy is something that, and again, this could be just my naivete, but it doesn't seem like it's a very popular discipline to pursue with Asians. And I wonder why, right? And part of me wonders, is it because it's not something tied to building something that's tangible 100% of the time, right? A lot of what strategy does is research and the presentation of research. And often those are very, very vocal roles. And the reason why I would encourage more Asians to pursue strategy is because it's one of those roles where there aren't a ton of us in any given agency, right? Usually it's the smallest discipline. And the reason for that is it takes a lot of years for an agency to kind of justify hiring someone at an associate director level and above, because those are really stewards of a brand, people who have years of expertise and experience. But my counterpoint is, well, if you don't hire junior strategists, where are your strategy directors of tomorrow? And so right now, I think what we're seeing is a surge in hiring of junior level strategists and planners and account planners and what have you. And I think now is the time to really think about, if you're curious about the world enough to think through a research first approach, or really love building narratives, and you have a dream to be a confidant for your client or a confidant for your internal team even, I would highly encourage you to reach out to your fellow strategists in the industry and just poke around, see how you may have navigated that kind of career path, especially for those of you guys who are maybe more on the introverted side. I am sure that you'd be surprised to find how many introverted strategists there are.
Great, thanks, Eric.
Oh, sorry. Just to piggyback, I was still on mute. Just to piggyback on what Eric was saying before I moved to my solution answer. Like part of it is, I think there's so much room for innovation in terms of like the way agencies and the agency world like communicates internally, because right now it really favors like the extroverted big personalities, and that's not the way that everyone communicates or learns or presents their ideas. And so it takes a little bit more time, but I think it's really easy to think about what could a meeting look like if, instead of it being kind of like a free-for-all forum, which is your typical meeting, format, and it was instead everyone in a brainstorm taking 5 minutes to write down their ideas first, and then all going around and presenting like by putting it on the wall, because then you're satisfying like the written communicators and the kinesthetic communicators, to present their, like, there are just so many things we could be doing differently if we took a little bit of thought. Anyways, that's not my solution, actually. The thing that I want to see that I think would be really basic, but you would be surprised. I mean, I've worked with a lot of different agencies in terms of like junior talent development or like helping out with intern programs. I would love to see across the board in the industry proper onboarding, growth plans, and review processes. You would be shocked at how many places just do not onboard their talent, do not have plans for people like on how they progress, like what the expectations are for you at this level and what does it take to get to the next level. And then also a process for regular feedback so that you know how you're doing at any given point. That is the only way that people can advance and feel like they're growing. And I think for Asians specifically, I think we respond, this is going to be a generalization, but I think we respond really well to that. Just like, let me know what is expected of me so I can know that I'm performing at the level that, like that uncertainty of like, am I doing a good job? Am I not doing a good job? If you're not getting feedback, I think can be very, it's frustrating, but it can just be very, that insecurity. No one needs to have that, on them in an already stressful kind of work environment. And so that for me, if I could go to every agency and implement that, that would be like the rest of my life's mission probably. And I don't think it takes much. Like you put the processes in place and then you just like let it run. It's kind of a self-sustaining thing once you do have it in place. But anyways, that for me, I'll step off my soapbox, but that's my like past where next and stuff like that. That's like my huge goal for me in the industry, is to try to help with that.
So those are really great ones. So for anyone in the audience, if you have influence on changing those, definitely try to apply those to change the future for all of us. What about, I'll pass it over to Josh for some solutions.
Yeah, I was actually just pretty much in agreement with everything. I was going to say that this is kind of a solution that I always talk about, because ever since I started in advertising, like there just wasn't a lot of resources for, like immigrant families and stuff to learn about it. So I never really blamed the industry per se to say like, oh, it's, they're exclusively like hiring white folks or whatever. It's more that, myself being a first gen is like, I didn't know anybody in advertising. So the fact that we even have this going on, you can find more mentors and learn about it. I think this is already part of the solve that I would have asked for. I've never expected to, change the makeup, like diversity makeup of our agency within a year. It's not like we're going to bring in everybody, simultaneously. It's going to be sowing the seeds for the future. So this is kind of, happily to be part of the solution of what I want to see for the future. So yeah.
Great, Vignesh.
Yeah, yeah, I was waiting for you. Sorry. Yeah, my thing is representation for the sake of representation is that's what a lot of agencies are doing. It just feels a little bit hollow. I would love to see more like value in the representation and like actually hearing the voices of the people in the room that are diverse and like not like just covering off the voices of all the diversities. For example, a CD I worked with, what she did was when the meeting starts, even just because you have an Asian in the room doesn't just check off the box and you can just move on using your meeting and like just the executives keep talking. What she did was first thing in the meeting, she asks the junior people in the room their ideas. So they get to go first before all the pressure sets in of like, oh no, it's going to be bad, whatever. So you have their opinions, they're confident enough to speak. They're going to be like involved in the actual, like, I don't know, project itself, instead of being just a little small thing that happened in the background. Especially when you're a junior, you don't have the confidence to like actually speak up to a room of 20 people in a big boardroom and say stuff that could be like a big, huge idea. And if you have someone who believes in you and says, hey, go ahead, tell your idea, it helps a lot. And that's what true like representation is, I believe. So hopefully that happens in the future. Fingers crossed.
Great. Thank you everyone for sharing those solutions. I mean, I totally agree with you when it comes to representation, because for me, being in learning and development, my perspective is that it should go beyond just the recruitment part, where a lot of these companies, we also need to focus on the retainment, like when it comes to professional development, or even sending, whether it's like the underrepresented groups to the training, or they send to the leadership programs, and what are like even the onboarding, like Natalie mentioned. So I know we have a lot of questions that are coming in, which is really great. So I want to make sure we can cover as many as we can. So maybe we can have one person answer each of them. So let's see, the first one we have is for anyone in the panel, how would you recommend to keep their network active? I often struggle to find reasons to reach out to former managers, peers, and internships, and wonder if my network is strong enough to rely on in the future.
I feel like I can maybe take point because we deal
Sure.
with a lot of that. Honestly, just that's another thing, right? We're all just kind of so keen in our ways of like, oh, I don't want to intrude. Just do it. I always say if you have a new project or anything, any excuse like, oh, I just finished wrapping up this campaign, I added this new thing to my book, then that's enough to just send an email and just say, hey, I just wanted to check in, maybe catch up sometime. It's truly as simple as that. And I always emphasize at the end of my calls, like, please check in with me every, once a month. Even ask the person how regularly they'd like to check in, put the onus on them and say like, okay, well, I know now that, if I check in once a month, it's not a nuisance to you, right? So I think that really is just a self thing of just getting over that hump of like, am I being too intrusive? And if you do really feel that way, just honestly, just find something that you've worked on. And literally today, someone just texted me out of the blue and was like, hey, Josh, was just thinking about like recruiting and wanted to get your thoughts on something. And I'm happy to check. I haven't spoken to this person in like 3 months, out of the blue, truly. And I'm, knowing me, like, and most recruiters and most people in the industry were pretty happy to help, frankly. I feel like there's been very few times when someone's just like, oh no, I'm too busy, I don't want to talk to you. If anything, they'll just say, sorry, a little slammed right now, maybe let's check up in a little bit of time. That's like the worst case scenario, is like a flat no. And you might just be leaving yourself like, what? Oh, I'll never know what happened if I didn't ask. So that's my quick answer for that one.
My favorite way, just really quickly, is when people send me updates on like how our conversation led them to somewhere good, or like how we are next. I mean, my situation is a little bit specific because I do We Are Next, but like when people send me updates on like where We Are Next has taken them, man, I love receiving those things. And that's so gratifying. Like it makes you want to, as like a mentor or like a connection, invest more time in that person, because you see the tangible impact of like that one conversation that you had or that one connection that you made. So I wouldn't underestimate like sending people like positive updates on like how you've used their advice and where it's taken you.
Great, thanks for sharing that. And for the person that answered, we're also going to have a Network with Ease workshop that's going to be on September 16th that I'm actually going to be facilitating that one. So you can learn more about tips on how to network at one of our future events. So another question we have is, would love to get some insights on what to add to your book as a junior, especially since you're most likely not working on super sexy bowling ads. At Super Bowl ads.
I like bowling ads better. Sexy bowling.
I don't know what yeah.
Sorry, what was the full question again? Can I hear it?
It was would love to get some insights on how and what to add to your book as a junior person.
Okay. Yeah, I can take that. So I guess I could start with the story of how I got noticed when I was an intern and trying to get a job. The best advice I could give you for a book for getting hired as a creative is be memorable. I get that like you can make as good of a campaign as you can, but the CDs and the recruiters who are hiring you do not have much time to review it. So keep it simple, but you have to make it memorable, as in when they go back and make a list and trying to find, or like someone's asking them like, hey, we need a junior team for this, for a funny role or a funny account, like a beer account or whatever. The recruiter or the CD or whoever should remember, oh, it's that kid who had that toilet paper thing, or like that one recognizable kind of hook for your book. What we did, me and my partner back in the day, we made websites for each of our books, but in like a certain theme. My name is Vignesh and it means the elephant god. So mine was like a huge elephant to start. So just like a bam in your face. And then my partner, Kat, was like, she has a very sweet personality. She looks like normal, sweet, nice. But when you click on a button, an illustration of her face turns into a zombie because she has very dark humor. So it's kind of like a weird kind of quirk thing that just grabs you, other than having amazing work, is what we did so that you, and we talked to the CD who hired us after, and they were like, you had some weird shit on your book. So yeah, so it gets you like another thing to talk about when you're talking to them on an interview. They'll be like, oh, why did you do that? And that kind of gets you into like speaking about yourself and explaining in your thought process. So like like you have a lot more connection and more personality when you do kind of like those kind of personal touches. So be memorable.
And I also saw Natalie wanted to add to that sometimes having a sexy brand in your book can backfire. And she was talking about the students that choose like Nike, because then that's going to be the expectation. Okay, so
Yeah,
oh yeah, you can add to it.
Very, very quickly, I also wanted to add to Natalie's point, because I think it begins to, and Haley, I promise I'll follow through. I'll match with you on LinkedIn. But it also addresses Haley's point of, you know, what if you want to work on like healthcare or pharma or something like that that's typically seen as boring. And I totally agree with what Natalie said, right? I think, and this is again coming from a strategist, I tend to think that the most strategic work and the most interesting work is if you can make a boring brand come off as interesting or very culturally relevant. And a great example of that is, you know, if you look at like Jet.com 2016, a piece from RGA, actually, it was a Super Bowl ad. They had zero budget for an actual TV spot for the Super Bowl, but how did they become the most culturally relevant brand during that Super Bowl? Well, they bought out all the SEO terms for Super Bowls, right? And that all of a sudden you're like, okay, do I really want to be the creative team working on selling bowls? Do I want to be working on Walmart's e-commerce operation? Sounds kind of boring, right? But all of a sudden now you look at that piece of work, and Michael, this is back to your comment. That's a bulletproof idea right there, where you're taking something that's seemingly mundane, you're using a mechanism in an interesting way, and you're turning a brand totally around 180 degrees.
Damn, that was impressive, Eric. You just like knocked
I know
down
everyone needs to reach out to Eric. He's like really great at answering all these questions too. So
Mini
before-
HBR.
Yeah. So another question is, anyone on the panel, how do you deal with imposter syndrome at work in general, but also due to being one of the few people of color in the room?
I guess I could start with imposter syndrome is a real struggle. I go through it a lot. I question like everything I do, but the only way to get through imposter syndrome is just making stuff. Like advertising and work is not the only avenue of like output of your mind and like your creativity or whatever you do. So getting yourself out there in other ways and like having other hobbies like photography, like I do photography and illustration just to like do something just for the sake of doing, because in advertising it's a common occurrence of like things that don't happen the way you expect it to happen. Like I did not produce anything for like a year and a half, 2 years for a stretch, because it was just like a pitch that went for 6 to 8 months. And then we didn't win it. And then we were on a huge client that like, well, we were working on a huge project and then they just pulled the plug after a year and a half. It's just like, it's very, when it works out, it's rewarding, but it doesn't all the time. So you need to have an avenue outside of work just so you can create without the boundaries and like restrictions of the client. So you create and you are confident in yourself that you are good. And it's just, when you start out, it's going to be hard as the imposter syndrome, dealing with it. But as you keep going through it, you keep learning, you keep making stuff for your own and for the client and everything else. You learn and you get mature and you're like, yeah, I can do it. Even though there's a little bit of insecurity always, you know, that's human. So just keep doing it. You'll get there.
Agreed, and that experience is probably the best way to get around it, frankly. Like, you know, we're at this level, we're still having it, but you know, at the same time, it is just the first couple of years you're gonna feel like, oh crap, it's just because everyone else is fixing my mistakes, or like, you know, I just lucked out in the situation. But once you actually look back, you're like, wait, I did do that. So for me personally, it was just being in it for a while. So I think it's not a good, like, it's not the best answer, unfortunately, but like time will solve everything, you know.
I think imposter syndrome can be totally reframed, honestly. Like Vig said, like everyone feels it at every level. When you feel it at entry level, it's because, or when you're just starting out, there's just so much that you haven't experienced yet. So you're more susceptible to feeling it. But the fact that everyone feels it means that imposter syndrome, just because you feel like you're not good enough or you don't know what you're doing, that doesn't translate to the reality that like, oh, you're doing a bad job and everyone thinks that like you shouldn't be there. I think imposter syndrome, of like a more productive way to think about it when you start to feel it, because we will feel it, is to think of it as like a signal that you're about to do something that you've never done before, or that you don't have that much experience in. You're about to learn something. And that can be really exciting if you reframe it that way. And it's like a signal that you're like about to grow in you know, like if you're able to use that feeling productively. And so that would be kind of my solution. The other thing I always tell people is like, when you get hired like as an intern or an entry level, like chances are you have like mad respect for your boss or whoever hired you, right? Like you respect their opinion, you think they're awesome, then trust that they saw something in you that warrants you being where you are, no matter who you are or what you have or haven't done. So those are the two things that I always try to tell people, because like everyone said, like imposter syndrome, it's a thing. You get more used to feeling it and dealing with it, but hopefully it can be like kind of a boost towards growth versus like something that hinders us in terms of like self-doubt and stuff like that.
I love that reminder for everyone to like reframe it. Like even being like a lifelong learner, like I like to tell people to be a student of life. Like we're all figuring things out. And I even have a mentor who's in C-suite, and she was like, we all don't know what we're doing. We're all figuring it out along the way. And so like everyone's figuring it out. It's just some people may like do it in disguise a little bit better than others, but it's It definitely does take practice. And so I know we only have 2 minutes left. I wanted to pass it back over to Bernice, and she's going to wrap it up with some of the upcoming events that we have.
No, you're on mute, Bernice.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone for coming to this session. We really want to share some upcoming events. Thank you to the panelists, to Jessalin for hosting. This was such a great session. This is something I wish I had when I started my career, and to have these resources. So we will follow up with an email with everyone's contacts and a link to this networking book, and as well as these upcoming events. So in 2 weeks, we have Leveling Up Your Career, and in 4 weeks, we have Elevating into the C-Suite. You don't have to be at these levels to attend these events. You know, we highly encourage you to network, meet these speakers, hear what they have to say, and learn from them. They didn't get to their careers without being good at it. So we really encourage you guys to attend these events. We had a lot of conversation around networking. How do you keep your network vibrant? How do you forge those allyships, those mentorships? You know, how do you forge all those things that really lend yourself to career success? Jessalin will be speaking on that one. So that is another one coming up on September 16th. And lastly, we have Find Your Voice. Another skill we talked about was presenting and having your voice heard in the room. Kenny Nguyen is hosting this talk. It's a 2-hour workshop. It was sold out twice and was covered by CNBC. So it's a great talk to learn about how to speak with conviction, and just kind of sharpen up those presentation skills. And lastly, keep networking. That deck that we threw in a couple of times, and again, we will send to you in the email. This is a great way to reach out to the speakers, to Jessalin and I as well, with any of your questions that we didn't cover. Building that network is so strong. So highly encourage that. And then we want to hear from you. Jessalin will also follow up with a quick survey. Anything else you want to hear from us? What other talks you want us to cover? We want to have more conversations with you guys and bring you what you guys need and kind of strengthen this community. So thank you very much. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for joining,
Thank
everyone.
Thank you so much,
Thanks for
everyone.
having us.
Thank you.